might hop in, Ollie.
And we're live on the YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. It is Thursday, the 11th of March. It's approximately 9:30 in the evening, and you've nothing else to watch on the TV, so you're watching Broadsheet on the telly. Welcome to the show. As you can see, we have our usual faces on the show tonight, because why wouldn't we? But we have a special guest who's also joining us. Now, this is the awkward bit, because you see what happens in the background. You see live TV. They get the feedback in the background. Joining me as usual on the panel is our main man in the north side. He's still in his mammy's wardrobe, broadcasting pirate streams. Jimmy Smith, how are you, Jimmy?
I'm pretty good. That's I'm still with the pirating, still representing the north side. Interestingly, today on Facebook Memories, this day last year, I posted about this. We were just at the fallout of the election. COVID was beginning to take a hold, and I posted about it was time to call for a unity government. Just reminding people about that. Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil didn't do that. They spent the next 3 months arsing around trying to form some sort of ragbag coalition like Sergeant Fury and his ragtag commandos. But look how well they've done a year on. I'm doing great. Otherwise,
we're not a bit.
That's good. Now, we've brought this on ourselves, folks. We not only have two core people joining us tonight. We have two celebrity accountants joining us tonight.
Two. Count them.
We have, as usual, the Countess of Crumlin getting extremely irritated with that as the weeks go on. Vanessa Foran, how are you, Vanessa?
Hi, Neil. Hi, Jimmy. And hi, Eddie, my good pal, Eddie. He's from the south side of Cork as well.
Yeah. You know, they say that Cork people are homesick, even when they're at home.
I put the back.
Yes, I feel only an accountant can do justice to introducing a fellow accountant. So perhaps you can introduce the good gentleman Eddie to the audience.
Of course, Eddie Hobbs. Eddie's more famous than we are, even more famous than you, Jimmy. But I wanted Eddie to come on tonight. But before we kind of get stuck into why he's here, I want to clear up a few things, because in one way, and we've touched on it before, is people know Eddie for some of the times you fell on your arse rather than the good stuff. And I think people need to remember that Eddie is sort of a consumer champion. He's why endowment mortgages are gone. He's why Tony Taylor was sent to prison. Eddie tracked him down himself. So it's that I think people need to remember Eddie for fighting for consumer rights in the financial product markets. And just from the accountant side, or the numbers side, Eddie actually isn't an economist. Eddie is a proper old school trained financial advisor. And when I say old school trained, he would have served his time in an insurance company and done the insurance exams, and then probably the banking exams, and then the pension exams, the proper old school training, which is probably gone now. It's just QFAs now, I think, Eddie. But and what Eddie brings to sort of any discussion about finances and sort of financial institutions is, I'm an accountant. I'm debits and credits, P&Ls and stuff like that. I'm obviously, probity and integrity and conflict of interest and transparency and accountability is right up my street. But what Eddie can do is he can take kind of complex financial products, stuff that is financially engineered by, nutters, because you are and you can take these globally produced products by institutional financial companies and financial interests and bring them down to bite-sized, understandable stuff that you can discuss over the kitchen table. And that's where Eddie's gift is on this. So Eddie's here with us tonight. Well, he's here as my friend, and I just let you know a conflict of interest. Eddie and I know each other from a way back, mainly through the credit union movement, but we can talk about that later. So I'm going to start off with handing it over to Eddie, because we're going to just talk about the whole the COVID globally and the economy and what's next, what's happening, his views. And he is totally up our street, folks, because Eddie's the guy that coined the phrase crony democracy. And that's what Jimmy and I have been sort of vibing about since Jimmy considered entering the presidential race back then. So I'm going to hand it over to Eddie. But first question I want to ask is, and don't roll your eyes, lads. When you were in school, were you in a certain person's class in Crease 3?
Oh no, Mihal was a year ahead of me.
Right.
Yeah, he was part of the. He would have been very much into the Collage de Crease 3 at the time, whereas I was regarded as a rebel, because I didn't. I arrived in. I think I was the only young fella in first class that actually played with a rugby ball instead of a football and hurling.
Well, that was a big problem in Crease 3. It was just all football. Crease 3 won the Sigerson Cup a few times, didn't they?
I was at a meeting a
Or
few years
one of
ago
them.
in Galway, and a guy came up to me and he said, "You remember me at all?" And he was an old chum of mine from school. I hadn't seen him since 1970 squat. And he reminded me when the presentation brother came around looking for vocations. We just arrived in, I think I was 11, and I stood up at the back of the class and I asked him what was really going on down in the monastery with all the brothers, were the rumors true, you see.
But do you remember the Crease 3?
And I don't even remember doing that, but I mean, apparently I did, yeah.
Oh, I believe it. I would believe it. Come here to me. Do you remember the Crease 3 Kaylees on a Sunday night?
Oh yeah, there was rowing them on was when you got sorted out, I can tell you. Yeah, she didn't.
Mommy, that would no.
We were talking about falling on your arse. I tell you, fell on my arse and a few rowing them ons.
Yeah, well, you know what? Cork women are very fussy.
Yeah, exactly.
Not good. No, they're not.
Eddie, you kicked off a thing recently, and you and I spoke about it earlier today. And one thing, you have this 3 phases, and I'm just going to hand it over to you. But one thing I found particularly intriguing was this thing of the economy and it being artificially enhanced. And you used the word steroids, and I want us to kind of go into that about it being artificially enhanced, because I think we need to tear that apart. But I know you have this three phase thing that you've uncovered, or you're investigating at the moment.
It's a way of looking at the what we're going through. My job day to day is kind of like to look at the kind of strategies that people need to adopt by literally looking at an awful lot of macroeconomic information. So I get stuff pouring in the door from Goldman Sachs and Rothschilds and all these, and then I go out to the fringe to try and find out what's really going on from the nutcases, trying to separate some of the nutcases from some of the geniuses that are out there, because that's generally where the next break in the groupthink is going to happen. And then just trying to figure it out just to help people through. And that's my job. So I've been doing that for a long time. And particularly over the last, since the global financial crisis, piles and piles and piles of stuff looking at like what's really happening, as opposed to what's kind of reported in the local media, which by the way, just as an aside, in Ireland in the last while has become very, very enfeebled. The mainstream media is a shadow of what it was. There's low energy, there's low resources, there's a tiredness there, there's low morale, and there's no real appetite to engage in investigative journalism and challenging journalism like we had before. So what you see is a veneer of what it used to be. Just be quite clear on that. So if you really want to find stuff out, you have to go beyond the conventional media, and we can come back to how it's behaved around COVID if you like, but that's been my finding anyway. So when you look at the world, not as it's presented, but how it really functions, what you see really is quite significant, that at the time of the global financial crisis, when Lehman Brothers went supernova, if you recall, in 2008, the collective response really was the creation of a new technocracy, which was really the nexus of central banks that got together and decided that the only solution to this problem was just to print money. And that's what they started. And they then created so much money. It was supposed to be temporary, of course, Keynesian economics, but it was done globally. And then it became the de facto backstop for everything. So they first started the bailout governments and then started the bailout companies. And now we're into bailing out consumers by creating money out of nothing from keyboards in central banks. So they become extremely powerful institutions and led, I mean, the World Central Bank really is the Fed, but the rest, they work in concert now. So anytime there's been a sag at all in the economy, they just step in. So when you do that, then Vanessa, what you're doing is you're creating an artificial steroid in the body, and you can keep getting away with it, but eventually the body will fail, because it's not really healthy. It's just being kept alive artificially, and that's where we are. So when we came around, then we've had 10 years of money printing, quantitative easing, call it what you want. That it happens in various ways. And what it does is you're creating money out of nothing, not real economic activity at all. It's just being created. It didn't create inflation the last time around because the money got stuck up at the very top at the banking system. And it was only really accessible by billionaires, by people with real serious amounts of money. And they just become even seriously more powerful and seriously more wealthy. It didn't get down into the working classes and the middle classes in most economies at all. The trickle down thing was just a myth that people were spun. You can see that when you look at the gap that's opened up. Now, that wasn't, I don't think, that was a byproduct of quantitative easing and money printing. So now we come around to this time last year when Lombardy remember Lombardy locked down, and then Italy locked down, and then there was panic and pandemonium, and markets collapsed 60-70% in a matter of days. Of course, that wasn't really reported in Ireland because we were all looking at the health data and the disease data, in other words. And of course, the response then was more quantitative easing, more money printing. This time around, 21 trillion, which is an amount of money equal to a quarter of global GDP, was created out of nothing and poured and now pouring out. But this time around, the money is gone straight into consumer bank accounts, most of it. Very, very different from the last time. And we can see this because in America, for example, the buildup of extra cash that Americans have sitting in their bank accounts, they didn't have 12 months ago, this time 12 months ago, is 2.5 trillion, which is more than 10% of GDP in America in extra cash.
But we have that here, Eddie. We're swimming in cash here.
We are, but to the extent of the States is off the charts, and why the States is important to us is because it's the engine room. We're really, we're very important to ourselves, but like globally, we're not really terribly important.
We're the petty cash too.
Well, we're kind of small, right? So I mean, the American, they're a quarter of global GDP. So what happens there is terribly important. So they're sitting on 23.5 trillion in cash. We're sitting on about a little over half our GDP in cash. They're sitting on more than once their GDP in cash. And all that cash is going to come out as the vaccines go through and all the rest. So I think we're heading into an inflationary cycle. And this isn't just because of the recent quantitative easing. I've held this view for several years. It's a core part of the advice that I give people, that all of this is going to end in inflation. Because it's the only way that the debt can be serviced, which is why we're seeing at the moment, the debt is so high at the moment, it's 277 trillion, it's 3.65 times global GDP, which is just, we've never seen these levels before. The only way that all this debt can be serviced is by making sure interest rates remain zero or negative. So, for example, in Ireland today, we're taking on more debt, but it's costing us less money than before we took on the more debt last year. Just go figure that, because people are paying us to take money off them in the bond market, and we're not the only one. So this is artificially created by the ECB. So my point is that the powers that be know that we've been in a long-term debt cycle really for about 40 or 50 years, and it's coming to an end. That's why interest rates are zero. There's no room really to go except maybe further negative. And the question then is, when will normality return? It can't, and that's why we need inflation. Our inflation will come in. I'm not saying it's a good thing.
Eddie, on that point, can I jump in a second? Because you're talking about, and yes, we're clearly heading towards hyperinflation in your own words, right? Absolute hyperinflation, right?
Well, it does not necessarily. Just be careful on that one, right? That will certainly happen in parts of the global economy where currencies collapse. And you had hyperinflation like Zimbabwe and Venezuela and so on. When you come to the big regional currencies like the Eurozone and the dollar, they'll hold out, and they can hold out an awful lot more longer. But remember, if you have money in the bank and you're being charged 0.5%, and inflation runs 3 or 4%, you've just lost 4% of your money in 1 year permanently. If that pertains for 3 or 4 years, you will lose about a quarter of the real value of your money you've got in the bank, and you'll never get it back. Now, so when you look at what the Fed are doing, and you have to look at them closely, They changed their policy last September, and they said, well, you know, our inflation target is 2% per annum, but now we have an employment objective as well. So it's just as important for us to maintain maximum employment in the United States. And by the way, the 2% doesn't have to be in a year. It could be over a period of time, unspecified, of course. So, like, it's quite clear to what they're going where I thought it would all end up, not just me, but lots of other people like me. And that's that they're going to let inflation run hot. They're going to let the economy run hot.
Okay, well then, so the hyperinflation, is this the end of Keynesian economics? And what is the next thing? Are we looking at Klaus Schwab? I mean, you know, I know I've just been reading the book.
That's a very good question, actually, Vanessa. That's a really cracker of a question. Yeah, you're saying, you're fast forwarding and you're saying, okay, get to the end. I'll get to the end. I get it.
No, sorry, I didn't mean it like that.
No, but you're right. You're right. Figure it out.
We don't want to get to the end, Jeff, because I want to step in there and figure out all these guys want to make money, you know, whether it's the insurance companies and the venture providers. I mean, they're all like, you mentioned Goldman Sachs. All they want to do is make money, and they don't want to make money like the 1% and 2%. They want to make ridiculous money, and they don't care how they do it, right? Yeah. And they don't care what they have to put in place or who they have to deal with to get what they want. And like, if interest rates are so low,
they're negative, yeah.
Yeah.
Deposit rate is negative.
They're all going to make money. Exactly. Because obviously, you know, I mean, in the credit union movement, we invest a lot of money and we're sort of restricted on what we can spend money on to make money, you know, the investments. Like, I know this sounds a bit childish, but or sort of low key, but like, how are all these big giants, the Goldman Sachs and all that crew, how are they going to make money if there's zero interest rates out there? Like, they all made out like bandits in the 80s, lads. Never feel sorry for Irish banks, I tell you. They ripped us off.
No worry that. No worry that.
There's, I think we've three questions to answer, right? So let me just deal with them in turn. Firstly, the Wall Street, let's just use that as a general term to describe those that make their living out of just moving assets around, buying and selling and speculating on movements and so on, and using derivatives to shore up risk and all that kind of stuff, right? Investment banking, let's call it that. They're delighted with this because money printing inflates the value of assets. So property prices go up, share prices go up, any kind of risk asset goes up. You create a surplus of capital, which is in excess of what's required. And that creates a sogginess in economies, which they're delighted because they're getting access to capital for near zero. And they can just about do anything with it. They don't put it into banks. They're no longer going to put it into government bonds because bonds have gone negative. But there's plenty of other assets out there that they can get what they call the carry trade and make money that way. But John and Josephine Soap, who are close to retirement, who've got their cash in the bank or in the post office, they're looking at negative rates for very many years and rising inflation, I think in kind of medium-sized single digits, Jimmy, not kind of hyperinflation just yet, right? Mm-hmm. It could go into hyperinflation, but it's more likely to be stagflation. In other words, where, you know, people's incomes aren't going up very much, but there is general inflation. Now people say, but there's no inflation. There never is until it arrives, a bit like a burglar, right? You don't know the burglar's been in your house until you open the drawers and suddenly all the jewelry is gone, or worse still, the jewelry that you bought your wife is still there because they've outed it as not real jewelry. Now that's when you're in real trouble because the burglars got you and you got it home as well, you know. Yeah. So I'm just saying that this is what's happening. So where it all ends, which is what the question Jimmy wanted to get to, and then we'll come back, maybe circle back to the credit unions, is that it ends in inflation. And as we speak, these growing technocracies, which have evolved over the last decade, are growing in power. And we can see them openly when you look on the World Economic Forum. People think this is some kind of conspiracy stuff. It's not. It's up there. It's on their site. This is what they want to do. Who are the World Economic Forum? No, most people never even heard of them. They are the most powerful group of billionaires really in the world. These people fly in private jets. They represent the top 1,000 companies. They're the members. It's a nice club. And they decide how the world should be kind of behave itself for the benefit of everybody, but especially them. And they formulated a plan very, very detailed. You can go into it, you can click on it and dive down into it. They've been building it for years. And part of it is to change the monetary system so that you end up in a situation where central banks print money, and this time they give it to consumers who aren't working because their jobs have been taken by artificial intelligence and robotics, to basically stay at home like battery hens, or maybe to do a bit of community service.
UBI,
That's their plan. That's their plan. Now
that is filtering down. Now that is filtering down. We've heard Pascal Donoghue talk
Yeah.
about this also. So that's not a conspiracy theory. I have read the book. I have his book at the moment that was updated in 2020. Yes, of course. So I mean, so and following on, I know he kind of fulfills the archetype of the evil villain and all that stuff. But
not him. He's just a figurehead.
That's all. That's all.
But Jimmy, my concern about this isn't that they're talking and planning this and doing it. It's that the democratic chambers we've got are not even discussing it.
That's the point. That's the point.
It's not coming up. And the general voter doesn't know the stuff is going on. It's just not being discussed. It's not being treated seriously.
Now, but you see, I find that they're squeamish in talking about facing into this, and I find RT are particularly squeamish.
Well, but we're nibbling, Vanessa. We're nibbling around the edges there, and we've already identified that there is an economic apartheid going on at the moment. I am, for instance, at the brink of bankruptcy at the moment. I don't mind saying it. It's been a year of no employment whatsoever. Yeah. So, it's very real, very, very real to me. And I'm very interested also into what, I know about the unsustainable debt. I know that Schwab and those characters have been talking about debt forgiveness, this stuff is that only for major corporations? Is that for me? You know what I mean?
No, it's for the big guys.
Let me just try and explain it, Jimmy. Maybe that'll help. Firstly, the actual level of detail we can see is just what's published on websites. We don't know what else is going on behind the scenes because it's behind the scenes. But what we can see is we see the IMF talking about money printing. They've said they're now apologizing for austerity. Sorry, we got that wrong.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
So now what we're going to do is just borrow whatever you like. Sure, rates are negative. Off you go. Don't overdo it now, lads, but off you go. And that was an amazing about turn in IMF policy. But then when you look at see who's heading up the IMF, you see a Bulgarian PhD economist, who went to America to study, but it's basically out of the eastern side, the East Bloc really of mindsets. And then when you look across that, and she's talking about, by the way, a new Bretton II agreement.
That's right. Yes, they've talked about it.
Which is a complete re-engineering of the global financial system, which happened in 1945.
Well, that's right.
And then Christine Lagarde and the ECB is talking about bringing in cryptocurrency, euro crypto, and this is all part of the greater game plan that is in the WEF.
Yes, it's plan. There. Right? This is the interesting thing. Well, this is the interesting thing that's all been consigned to the dustbin of conspiracy theories when it's right there. And here's you talking about it, a renowned person, an expert on finance.
I'm just saying it's real, right? And we need to start talking about it, and we need to start talking about it in conventional media.
But Eddie, this is the thing. What can we do about it? What can I do about it? There's no democratic means. There's no democratic mechanisms to be involved in this in any way.
Well, we have an issue, right? Which is really, for me anyway, is really, really after becoming pronounced since the emergency. Really, let's call it that was announced last March. By the government, by most governments, due to the Italian lockdowns, and it is that we have the death of mainstream media. It was weakening anyway, but it died. I mean, what RT have been dishing up since then, in my opinion, and remember, I've been in and out of RT for a long time, so it's not that I know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about it from an outsider's perspective. The RTE are working the state as the state broadcaster, and it's a time of war as far as the state is concerned. So so when you click on news on RT and it has anything to do with COVID-19, you can park news away in your library in your head under popular fiction. right?
That's what I've stopped watching, and I'm fully in agreement with you there. It's very clear, absolutely clear. But again, I ask, so what? So we have social media, which is just a labyrinth of mis and disinformation and valid information also. So I think it could be the rise of the guru, some guy that can collate all this stuff for people and give them sound bites. You know,
I actually think, well, just to finish the story, right? It's also clear to me, because of going in and out, that News Talk basically changed from News Talk to Magazine Talk about 12 months ago. Walked off the pitch. It toned down any kind of challenging the state, which is what the position it had been taking, which was welcome. It completely toned it down because the station was up for sale. And the owner of the station would need to sit down with the government at some stage and get permission to pass the license to somebody else. And it was being set up in that way. If that's just a business decision, nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying out the reality is that the national news agenda, which is set in the morning by RTE, has been driving the whole thing. So what I've been noticing quite a lot is that the Irish Times would get a leak from the let's call it the civil service establishment. They would run it as a speculative piece the following day. That would then be reported, as it says in the newspapers on Morning Ireland, and then about what the government might be doing that day or the next day at 6 or 7 o'clock in the afternoon when they get together to talk to the cameras. And that would give the politicians then the entire day really to get public feedback. And then they'd stand up and they'd say, you know, they might tweak a thing here or tweak a thing there. And that's been our news in inverted commas. So through all that then, I gave up watching it as well. Through all that then, you can't expect, let's call them mavericks or challenging or counter science, and there's a lot of it out there, to be given the same amount of airtime that would be given in a normal, conventional, balanced, modern media platform. It's not, because it's not happening. And therefore, those that, and there are a lot of them out there, good scientists, good medical people that have completely different views.
absolutely.
To the NEFIT view, are simply being denied the time to do it. And that's because it's contrary to what the state wants, and that's the society we're in.
But you know, and to be clear, it's not just our own state. Oh, is Eddie gone? Is he there?
I'm
It's
still
not.
here. I don't know why it's doing that.
You switch your camera off.
No, I didn't actually. It switches itself off.
Oh, I hate that.
It's allergic to Eddie.
It's part of a dastardly.
It's the Illuminati. That's what I'm, as we.
The Illuminati, yeah.
Yeah, that always.
Yeah,
That,
but
we
you know,
can't-
while Eddie's trying to turn on the light switch there or something, Eddie, you said there about they toned it down in News Talk because it was up for sale and there would be the license negotiation. Is that why, or is it because the vendor has a lot of government interests? His business, it has a lot of government.
Well, you know, we know who we're talking
Special
about.
interest, and I don't really criticize that. You know, if the business people are out to make money and turn a buck, and I'm not criticizing that to a certain point. But
I'll
Vanessa,
and I'll come back in if that's okay. I'll see if I can sort out this camera. Let you chat on there, and I'll be back in a second. Okay.
All right. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we know who you're referring to there, but it's also, this is the case, and I'm on the phone every day to my friends in London. The BBC are the same. Channel 4 exactly the same, right? So that's clear that the European, maybe the world media, we saw it. Look, we covered the American election pretty well here. We saw the narrative and the anti-narrative. We saw all that happening. It seems to be a global thing again, which ties into what Eddie's been talking about. This
it is
government.
global. There's a message, but you know what? People have been groomed to swallow everything they've been told. I think you know what I mean. I think people have just got. There's not enough argy-bargy in any discussion. You mentioned the debate last week between Neil Redmond and John McGurk. You don't get to see stuff like that.
That was brilliant. And it was. I think it was the RT shot themselves in the foot because they were immediately regretted it. You know,
and we come from the generation, right? Neil didn't know any of this happened.
No,
but you remember the whole 70s and 80s with the thunder and disgrace and lads.
All of that stuff, great stuff.
And threatening to thump the head off each other.
Absolutely.
Like this is,
good, having Ian Paisley down to Donegal, fantastic, you know, great stuff.
But guys, like, it's not just like, I mean, yeah, that was one debate and it was very good. But the fact that that's the standout should worry us.
I'm very worried.
The fact that Neil Redmond is standout on anything is a big worry, to be honest with you.
we haven't been talking to each other like other countries talk to each other during this period, and that's the concern, because the media itself is in such an enfeebled condition, and that's just the truth of it. I mean, the strong characters that were around, independent, strong-minded people writing in newspapers, well paid, by the way, with completely contrary views, at least would stir up a debate, and we'd go at it hot and heavy. We're very good at that as a people, as debating, and very good at listening to radio. But unfortunately, the content has let us down. Most people just switch off. You know, they say, sure, it'll sort itself out, because nobody's standing up.
Switched off. I don't believe people switched off, Eddie. I do believe that mainstream media, believe they switched off from mainstream media. And I'll give you an example now where I still believe the everyday person is more informed than I'm just going to say our mainstream parties, and that would be Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and Sinn Féin, you know, Labour. I remember going into Dublin Castle the day of the repeal count. I was in a taxi, and the taxi driver the conversation was just out of this world. He had it all sussed. He knew who was playing what. He knew who was involved in what group, and there was no switching off at all. And I see that in the movement. People could tell you stuff going on that you'll never read in the Cork Examiner or the Independent and stuff. Like they treat, and it's happening in America as well, by the way, the everyday person or the voter, they are being treated like they have no interest or they don't care. And that's actually not true. People are a lot more engaged. They're just pretending that they're not. And if you look at the programming in RTE, it's deliberately designed to just entertain the RTE set. Because if you look, it's the same people all the time.
Yeah.
There's no outsiders. And of course, I've written about RTE from a financial point of view, not from a content operational point of view, because I frankly wouldn't know what. I wouldn't know one star from another. But like, it's just this, they're there to serve themselves. And like, quite recently in RTE, they redid the payroll, as if payroll is the problem in RTE. Do you know? And like, you're right in that they're selling a message. But like, I actually don't believe the everyday person is believing it anyway. I don't. I have great belief. I have great faith in, I know, the everyday person, but I think the Irish citizens, and even everywhere, they're a lot more clued in than they're being, than
they are.
Our decision makers are letting on. That's
I do wonder, because Adam Curtis talked about this 5 years ago, and he was a BBC investigative journalist. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he did a couple of great documentaries, and he did talk about what Eddie is averring to there, the technocratic, the post-political landscape, which I think we're heading towards, it seems to me, because when we zoom out, I can moan and bitch about Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. I'm clearly not a fan. But it seems to even me that they're running around like headless chickens. They don't know what they're doing because they're getting information from somewhere else. Corporations are running countries. We know this. Well, it's beginning to become very obvious to me. And I'm not actually a bona fide conspiracy theorist, you know. I don't think so. I don't even know what to find.
No, you're not actually. You're not. You're just, you can just be cranky. You're a crank.
An observation there. I mean, in terms of the Irish capacity for detail, which I think is extraordinarily high, and a huge radio listenership. But remember, I wrote and presented Rip Off Republic, which broke records in RT for factual television. Right? Yes. That hasn't been said since. And that wasn't me. That was the public reaction to the content, right? And the government, and turning on the government then when they tried to diss it, right? That all happened in 2005, and then of course the shackles came on after that in terms of what I was going to be allowed to after that. But the point is, that's there. What's missing, and I keep making the point, is we're missing the strong editors, the independent, old style, good journalistic attack, you know, kind of like sniffer dogs, an attack dog of editors that are prepared to go in there, whether they're left or right, it doesn't matter, roll up their sleeves and really get stuck in.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they're completely missing in the state broadcaster.
No doubt. No, full agreement there. Absolutely. And that was why that was an interesting outlier having your man on last week on the Claire Burns show. You know, there are people in the past that we're not allowed to say their name, Gemma O'Doherty, who was a very good, I'm sorry, she was a very good investigative journalist with the Indo. I thought she was good. You know, we still have Jean Kerrigan. I don't know why Jean is around, to be honest. I don't know why Dennis O'Brien puts up with him, but I think it's great as long as he holds on, you know. Ultimately, it's small potatoes because I think what's happening is global and it's bigger.
Well, I mean, that is the case. But at the end of the day, we do have we do live in a democracy. These things will eventually come down into the National Chamber. We can bemoan the quality of the people that make up the National Chamber, but remember, we've put them there.
We do.
We put
and
them there.
it's this is the thing. You need to get better people to run.
No, you need to break the clientelistic system we've got.
The dynastic politics is go on.
We all want to change.
Yeah, but I mean, we were chatting. Hang on now. We were chatting about Kate O'Connell. Okay, she didn't get re-elected. Now she's going to come on the show, and it you know, like there's no dynasty there.
No,
Okay.
but
And you know, and Leo Brackart shortchanged that girl big time. Now, Kate and I's politics are miles apart, by the way. So this isn't me doing a shout out for them and all. But like this is like she was one of the most brilliant people he had on his backbenchers, and he brings in Regina. I'd say no more.
The Irish political system, right? It sends to the National Chamber those that are best at shoe leather politics in the local constituency, who treat the voters like clients, run clinics for their clients like
literally,
patients, and then expect the quid pro quo when it comes to going into the polling booth with their
In fact, Eddie, let me remind everybody that in 2018, I got very incensed with the subtle change in semantics, where we were no longer citizens, but we were customers.
Customers.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, we use that as part of your campaign launch when we were talking about it. You can allow yourself to be treated like a customer, or you can conduct yourself like a citizen.
Exactly.
Can I tell you with my little involvement when I was in the background as the president without power?
Oh Jesus! I no, you didn't. You went there. You went there.
Well, I went in there as a liberal, right? Trying to give some. Well, I got my policy. Well, I'll come back to that in a second, right? Come back to that. Well, actually, no, I'll deal with it now, and then I'll tell you the funny story. Principal reason I got involved in all of that was to try and put on the national agenda a social progress index to counterbalance GDP. And that social progress index was launched last February by Professor Cal Muckley of UCD in a privately funded paper that he put together. We went out and crowdfunded it, and I threw in some cash as well. And that paper showed how we would go around and measure the interface between the state and its citizens, and using artificial intelligence, using customer service surveys and so on, and put together one index which would act as a counterbalance to GDP. So from then on, GDP would always have to have this index sitting next to it, which was your social progress index. It would start at 100. Obviously, if it goes below 100, you're making a crap of it. If it goes above, your social progress is improving. And then it would have about 50 or 60 sub-indices. All of this managed and collated by the CSO, so that we're no longer guessing about how well or otherwise we're improving the lot of our citizens. It's actually scientifically measured.
Fantastic.
So that was adopted very quickly by IBEC, as it transpires, and I think by ISME, and it's ended up as the opening policy in the programme for government. But unfortunately, it's been hijacked now by the civil service, who are horrified at it. And I know, because they attended the launch, because we can't have outsiders measuring the outcome of our state services. Sure, we can do that for ourselves. I said, no. The data scientists are going to do it, and it will be scientifically reported instantly back to policymakers. So it's now called a happiness index.
That's right. Jacinda Ardern has been on about that as well. That's a great idea, but it is a good idea intrinsically.
Yeah. So sorry, I was getting to that point from a point I was going to make about a funny story, and I can't remember where we were. How do we get into?
Presidential? You were involved in something.
Listen, viewers, when he got involved in there, I knocked it out of him. Don't worry.
we're in the cave anyway, right? Which is a basement room in Boswell's Hotel. Very important. Big long table, everybody's sitting around the table, and all the policymakers, like really brains around the table, fantastic people in the background, right? Top people in their areas. I thought it was very interesting. So I'm sitting there listening away. And we had a real rock and roll session, went on for about 3 hours, right, of fantastic policy formation and people up presenting with PowerPoint presentations and one thing or another. And I said, my God, this thing could actually work, you know? And then finally, we had a couple of politicians, people we were trying to get elected in the room, right? I won't say who, right? So the next thing, one of them decided to speak. And we were all shocked. It was actually good. So the room went completely silent. And he said, and I knew we were in trouble at the stage when he said this. He said, I'm all for reform as well, provided it doesn't upset anybody. There was dead silence in the room.
Are you going to put a name on that?
Everybody in the room was thinking the same thing I was thinking. What the am I doing here? I could be at,
shame, Eddie. Go on.
I could be at home, my family, instead of in here with this clown, right? And that's what happened. That's a true story, right?
No,
and
there's, I've noticed.
Arrived in and he was
I
late.
believe it. Oh,
Why
God,
late?
yeah, I would.
Why are you late? And this is true. He said, I had to go to 4 funerals today.
Yeah.
Why'd you have to go to 4 funerals? And then he actually went through the logical detail in the constituency he was in about if he didn't turn up at such and such a funeral, so many such families would have noted it. The clients, in other words, he was doing the client visit. So he was late for the meeting because he was attending funerals. That's what he did the entire day long, attended funerals, shook hands, slapped the back, and that's what we're putting into the National Chamber. And then we're wondering why the place is so badly managed, why the Children's Hospital ends up in the James, why we can't manage a vaccine rollout, why the health system doesn't work no matter how much money we pour into it, etc., etc. The amazing thing about the Irish economy, I keep saying this over and over and over again because we're like a tiger economy, is despite that handicap, we're still producing good stuff. And our young people, and the most important asset of the whole lot for our future is the young people of a very, very high quality.
Maybe
despite the handicap.
Maybe on that, Eddie, you might segue into immediate matters. If I could change gear for a moment, because the productivity isn't there at the moment because of this extended lockdown. So I kind of wanted to ask you about that. You know, we know today what was inevitably coming anyway, that we're not going to come out of lockdown in any meaningful way till the end of May. So we'll essentially have had the longest lockdown in Europe, and possibly the longest the total lockdown, I guess, over the period.
We already have now. I mean, we already
have. Okay. And I know Michal said today that part of the reason for the extended lockdown is the vaccine fudge. But you know, but you look around Europe and no other country is extending a lockdown on that basis. When we look to reopening, because there's a lot of negativity and pessimism amongst people. You know, we've seen the figures. You know, finally the figures are there around people's mental health and that. But what economically will Ireland look like when we come out of this? We're going to have an extended period where businesses are shut, where anyone who deals, you know, non-essential businesses who perhaps compete internationally will have suffered. And you know, we are sitting on this. Well, I always care for this because myself and Jimmy aren't necessarily sitting on all the cash that Eddie and Vanessa are talking about. Any Americans want to send a few of that trillion this way? So when we come out of this at some point, you know, hopefully this year, and obviously international travel is curtailed as well. What does that picture of Ireland look like? Are we going to see an accelerated spending period? Are we going to see irreparable damage to the economy? What's your take on it?
Well, there's a number of points there that we should quickly visit. Firstly, we're in the good stuff. There's pros and cons, right? The good stuff. We're in the very fortunate position as we've already had a banking crisis. We've done it. We went through it. We've recapitalized the banks. So as the non-performing fatberg of bad debt hits the European banking system, and we think it's going well. When it was calculated last October by the ECB, the number was 1.4 trillion. Just consider that, right? Which is about 3 times more than what it was the last time around. That's going to hit the European banking system. That's going to create issues. It's probably bigger, so we should be okay there. Our young people couldn't, or private sector young people couldn't emigrate and get out of Ireland this time around because every place else was having the same problem, so they stayed here. That's to our benefit. We have a young population. Our mean age is about 10 years younger than Europe. This is very, very important. We have a huge infrastructure deficit, a housing deficit that all have to be met to meet the growth of the young. But like, that's our greatest asset. We are actually seeing population growth for the first time in generations. But very few countries around the world, the United States is seeing it. That's why its economy is doing so well. India is seeing it. Japan is aging. China is aging. It's gonna get old before it gets rich. Russia's population is diminishing at a rate of knots. So we're actually very well placed. And Ireland really does behave like an Asian economy. We have a very, very fast response to international growth.
Yeah, you're dead right.
But unfortunately, we also get hurt when bad things happen internationally. The problem we've got here is we have a bipolar, or you call it, Jimmy, apartheid. We have a split indigenous industry. Can I just deal with that point? So when I look at the global financial crisis last time around, and I look at this crisis, those working in the foreign direct investment sector, pharma, technology, what crisis?
Untouched, yeah.
And those working for the state,
untouched.
What crisis? Mm-hmm. So when I see the unemployment numbers at the moment are 25%. It's wrong. It's 30%. Our unemployment should be expressed as a percentage of those working in the private sector, because they're at risk of unemployment. So we have a split workforce. Do we have those that bear the brunt of any downturn? So we'll see that happening. It is the private sector workforce that is getting hit. And this time around, I have the numbers here in front of me. You can see it in hotels, in the arts, entertainment, restaurants. You know the stuff. Mm-hmm. We're seeing 50% falls in arts and entertainment, devastation in other parts of the indigenous Irish economy, SMEs, small business, people literally living from hand to mouth, turning up for work for minimum wage, the people inside in the shops serving the people during the COVID crisis. And anytime you turn on RTE, and I've nothing against them, I have a daughter, a nurse, right? All RTE can talk about is the Garda teachers and nurses, the Garda teachers and nurses.
Same as ever, yeah.
Everybody just says, well, what about the Garda teachers and nurses? It's like you can't talk about any other worker. And I said, no, what about the bloody private sector workforce that are emigrating the last time round and never came back? What about the people whose jobs are gone in a jiff and they don't have any trade unions fighting their corner because they're too cozy inside in the public sector where they're effectively working as a labour price fixing cartel? That's what I believe. That's what I feel, and that's been
But Eddie, what you're referring to there is something we've touched on quite regularly here. Is that a lot of people that are involved in those decisions, whether it's in the media or at government, or like you were saying, nurses, teachers, guards, and all this, right? They're in one way they're not amongst us, because they're involved in decisions that where there's no contribution from the likes of us. Like I'm guessing what your position at the moment, but we're all sole traders. We're all independent sole traders. We're not employed, or we don't have the benchmark pensions and stuff. So
I run business for the best part of the last years. So I mean, I'm the same. I'm an employer. And I'm responsible to my workforce, etc. And I have to deal with everything that's coming at me as well, along with all other SME owners, right? But my point is this: back in 2001, a deal was done, a big deal. No notes were taken, right? They called it benchmarking, but it was actually a setup to plunder the state forevermore, and it's been like that way ever since. So what we've had since then, we've had a 6-fold increase in pension liabilities, even though wages have only gone up about 2-fold over the period. And time and time again, that we can see the premium rates. Now, this isn't to criticize individual workers, because whenever you get into this, that's what happens. Oh, you've it against the public sector. I don't. I've it against cartels. All my life I'm against cartels. That's what Rip Off Republic was about. This is just another one, but nobody wants to call it out. And they get a free ride in RT when they're being interviewed.
Well, actually, Eddie, I called out the benchmarking.
Because it's very important, right? These trade union leaders are paid 4 or 5 times the average wage with defined benefit pension schemes. Now, let me just put that into context. 92% of the private workforce have no guaranteed pensions at retirement age. They've none. They have the old age pension, that's it. Some of them have savings. They're not guaranteed pensions, they're savings. and those that do are only a tiny fraction of the private workforce. The reason why they don't have pension savings is they can't afford them. When in the public workforce, it's the other way around. It's 100% have them. So my point is this, that if we want to create equality in Ireland, and I get sick listening to the left-right divide on it. If we really want to face Irish inequality the way Ireland is built, we need to address we need to have a workforce that allows mobility between public and private sector, and allows for meritocracy to take place in public sector work, to bring through all the talent to drive the change and incentivize it. And that's why I think the Social Progress Index is so important, because it can be used to incentivize robust reform in the public sector. But at the moment, there ain't no reform, and there's going to be none. We'll come out of this crisis just as we went into it, with that system still in place, until people wake up and smell the roses about how Ireland really works, not how we think it.
Well, just zooming back out again, Eddie, just a little bit there, because I love everything you're saying, and I'm 100% behind it. And this identifying that public-private sector dichotomy is brilliant, because I'm one of those guys, worked all my life. I don't have a pension. I can't afford it, right? But I'm not whinging. There's loads of people like me, and we're artists. We chose to do this. So it was a different world in 2005. Now, we touched on it earlier on, the end of Keynesian economics and the reason. Surely the people you're talking about, the SMEs, the self-employed, they're exactly the people that this new economic model, whatever you want to call it, if it is being put into place, the post stakeholder capitalism, shareholder capitalism thing, whatever that is. Now, I'm not an economist. I don't profess to be. I've read a little about it. I've read the Great Reset. That's an interesting, dry, non-sinister read until you understand what you're reading.
Yeah.
And then subsequent what he talks about. So it's clear to me, sitting here and with plenty of time on my hands to root around on the internet and find out what the hell's going on, because I've nothing else to do, is like, yes, so surely the people they are talking about are my brother, the self-employed electrician, the SME, the guy who now can't work because of the 5K thing, but has been doing fine for the last 11 months, right? Me, or Neil, the self-employed artistic guy, musician, improv guy, we're going to be wiped out. It's very clear. I already kind of am, you know?
Well, I mean, what the point is that the indigenous Irish economy, made up of SMEs, is enfeebled and weak politically as well as organizationally. It's not represented, and when the gang gets together at the table, they don't have anybody representing them, because it's too dispersed. You have sectoral groups. ISME is getting stronger, which is a good thing. But I mean, it's not broad based. Workers in the SME area are not really organized like that. The trade union movement is highly concentrated in the public sector, because that's where the money is, that's where the subs are, that's where it's easy peasy. And that's my point. That the people that run those things really they're not like trade unionists that I knew when I was growing up. They're
not Larganess. And it was really interesting, because with some of the funds, for instance, again, not just talking about myself or what myself and Neil do, but because we don't have premises, for instance, which who has a premise? Like my premise is 200 venues a year all over the world. They're my premises. I don't have one particular. I have a studio in Ferris, but I didn't qualify for any help at all. So they don't even understand the language of talking to SMEs that are self-operators.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, that's just what I'm saying is I'm just describing how Ireland works, which is what I was doing back in the day with Rip Off Republic. This is how it really works, folks. And that's why it got the reaction it got. But then the Broadcasting Commission came in and said, you're not allowed to look down a camera anymore and give an opinion.
Well, you see.
We were made for each other.
If I could be bold, Eddie, and kind of go back to part of my original question with you, when we do come out of the lockdown later, and I'm looking at it from the perspective, if you say somebody who's watching now who is an SME, who is self-employed like ourselves, I'm wondering, one of the kind of elephants in the room throughout this is how we're going to pay for this. And I know in the UK, I think it was Whitty came out last week in the UK and said, look, income tax is going up, taxes are going up, there's no question about it. We have a huge, increased debt. The closest we got to it was, I think, Leo saying that, or Pascal saying there'll be no increases in in
Yeah.
tax this year, but now we're going to have to pay for this. The government's talking about, and we're all focused on we need to fund the health service better, but ultimately, we can't see any major increase in public expenditure while we have this huge debt.
Okay, let me just deal with that directly. I wouldn't take too much notice of what Pascal says. Somebody just said something to him, somebody puppeted his back and off he went, and he just said, well, we're going to have to put up taxes. No, we don't. I mean, the facts are that because the ECB is supporting Irish government bonds at negative rates, we're going to end up in a crazy situation as we come out of this, where the cost of servicing, paying every year for the national debt will be less than when we went into COVID-19 crisis. Just consider that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be less.
Really?
But we would still borrow from the private equity funds, though, even though we can borrow at negative interest rates.
Yeah, because it's negative. That's what I'm starting. The whole thing is being gamed, the global financial system to do this, right? So our servicing costs as a percentage of GDP will be 1%, exactly the same as what it was in the year before last, 2020 and in 2019, right? It'll be 1%, right? And that's because of negative interest rates. So yeah, we'll have added maybe 30 or 40 billion to the national debt, but our GDP actually did okay last year. It grew, imagine, right? I mean, it's just crazy, right? So this idea that somehow there's a massive tax tsunami coming our way and that we have to pay the grim reaper, right, is almost a Catholic way of looking at it. Right? No, like the guilt, like we have to do the penance now. We have to pay the man.
Yeah, but you know what? Eddie, what I'm saying is that I think there's a compromise on, because there isn't massive interest rates. Let's just say on bonds and money for the boys. I'm just generalizing there, folks. I don't want this gender thing now come back at me. But like the want to make their money. They want their cut. Where are they making their cut? Are they making their cut from,
The NTMA have done a very good job in stretching out the Irish debt to over a very long period of time. They've done a very good job in taking advantage of negative rates. These are technical things that are going on all the time. The result of that is that we'll end up in a situation where we'll have a higher, like you say, you come in, you've had to increase your mortgage on your home to pay for unexpected costs, but the actual rate, the interest rate you're paying is less than what you were paying, even though you borrowed more. That's where we're going to end up. That's where we're.
Yeah, but that's what got us into the Celtic Tiger, where people thought they could afford more than they actually could. So
listen, we're not out of control. We're not helming our own ship. As soon as the emergency is over in Europe, the European Stability and Growth Pact will be re-implemented, and new parameters will be put around how much you're allowed to borrow as a percentage of your GDP. So it doesn't really matter who gets into the Dáil chamber, so long as we are members of the EU, there's going to be constraints on what we can borrow. We're not in Italy or France or Germany where we can bully the centre to give us a derogation on that particular rule. It will be applied to us. And that's the only thing that's saving us from nutcases coming in, promulgating the idea that you can just borrow infinitely, like modern monetary theory. That debt doesn't matter. You can just put up to whatever you like, and if there's a problem, you can increase taxes to cool down the economy. That's not going to happen.
It won't happen. It won't happen to those who can afford it.
Pardon?
It's not going to happen. It's increasing taxes is just going to be on the general public. It's not going to be on
but I don't think
they're not going to change corporation tax for a start.
I don't think. Yeah, but you're locked into. Sorry, Vanessa, you're locked into the idea that somehow all of this is going to have to be paid for by increases in taxes. And I'm saying,
no, that's true.
It's not because they've engineered negative borrowing rates. Like the penny hasn't dropped on what that means. That means that so long as the Irish economy grows, right, our services will remain at 1% of GDP, which is actually very affordable. The problem is what we're doing with the money that we're borrowing. Like, how effective is it? Are we putting enough money into infrastructure, into housing, into
this is exactly this is it. This is it around the kitchen table, folks. We're actually borrowing money to meet the public payroll and the public pension fund, right? And we're not borrowing money at negative interest rates to build social housing, or put money back into the pockets of the local authorities to take back control of social housing and build like they did in the 50s, 60s and early 70s. We're not borrowing money at negative interest rates for that type of development. We're borrowing to pay the public payroll and fund a hospital that is so out of control. In fact, the people that started on the project team has changed a half a dozen times since. Like it's never going to happen. So that never makes sense, if you know what I mean. But the decision making is narrowed down to a few. And if you were to pick the team to develop the children's hospital again, none of them would be part of that team.
Well, they would, because there are no consequences. None.
That's it.
And until there are consequences, we will continue to. Sure, it doesn't matter. It's just taxpayers' money. Sure.
Yeah, well, we've had that here, in that they get away with this because there's no accountability. It's like the mother and baby homes. Well, let's go into Davies here now. The lads knew what they could do, because there was nobody going to pull them up.
Sorry, Vanessa, just before we went to Debbie, sorry, because I did want to finish out that line of question about Eddie. Sorry now. So what you're saying in layman's terms, we don't have to expect a period of austerity. Leo wasn't telling lies, and that's fine. So when we do emerge then, and you're going to have that, certain industries, there'll be a level of decimation. There's places business that won't reopen. What happens then when the likes of, say, moratorium on mortgages ends and tenancy, the right of eviction ends, and you're going to have this gap between those people getting reemployed or what have you? You know where I'm going with this.
Absolutely. And it's the one question that always gets my blood boiling, right? What will happen this time around when the forbearance measures come off is what always happens. And that's when the banks will tiptoe through the community, and they will decide who is illiquid and who is insolvent. Yeah. And they will drown whoever is insolvent under the Irish insolvency regime, which came in the Insolvency Act 2012, and which was rigged in favour of the aforementioned banks for unsecured loans anyway. Okay, that's what will happen. I deal with people every day, and Vanessa, I know you do too, that are in this dark tunnel for over a decade now. Stress, family breakdown, suicide, rotten, lives destroyed, because we couldn't come up with a modern human insolvency regime that stops treating debt as if it's some form of Catholic guilt trip.
Shame, yeah, they do. They treat it like shame.
Yeah, and get people going again, understanding that the vast majority of people want to get going again, aren't just bumming off the state in some kind of Netherland of indebtedness, right? I mean, it's shocking, and that's what's going to happen again. And the reason why it's going to happen again is because we have stakes in the very banks that are going to be experiencing this bad debt. So you often hear this thing, oh, this is terrible, all this thing that's happening to Irish citizens and families. You hear politicians saying it, and then they'll go in and they'll work systems which are protecting the very institutions that are implementing that misery. Yeah.
They've done, Eddie, what they've done is they have given the vulture funds bigger teeth now. And
Vanessa, like the vulture funds weren't as, anyway, that's a separate one. The vulture funds.
No, the idea of them originally was good, to take out this toxic debt, get it off the balance sheet. And if the lads could squeeze 5-10 cents a euro out of it, that's what they did.
Yes, but Irish families continue to carry unforgiven debt, and they're put through crazy systems where the banks have a veto if there's going to be some kind of a person.
But the problem with it all was different banks treated it differently, so there was no consistency across how Ulster Bank would manage it and how KBC or how Bank of Ireland or AIB all had different.
No, Vanessa, be quite clear. The Insolvency Act 2012 was written over the shoulders of the Department of Finance by the bank executives. That's what happened.
Oh yeah. Well, what they did was they took what was a financial process that you and I did for years and made it a legal process. So it was a combination, and it was deliberately connected so that there was a veto. Okay.
When the Insolvency Act was launched, and the head of the Insolvency Service
Larkin.
been appointed, I asked him what discussions had yet taken place with the Department of Health over the suicides that were going on as a consequence of the way this was being implemented. And he looked and he said, none. There was no integration between health, the Department of Health, Mental Health Services, and the Department of Justice, who were implementing this regime. That's the truth. And yet it's a combined problem. It is a combined problem, right? And I mean, I remember in 2009-10, I had 4 phone calls, four contacts from people that didn't know me at all, asking me to personally intervene in suicide situations, right? And that was just me. This thing was an epidemic, right? That devastated the private sector, who bore the brunt in the global financial crisis. And it is again the private sector, the indigenous economy, the SMEs, and those that work for them that are bearing the brunt of this again, especially in those areas that are devastated by the closures. That's the truth of it. While the public workforce and those working for FDI have largely, and not no fault of their own, have largely sailed through largely unaffected. Right?
Yeah, they sailed through it. You're and but the thing, we just to kind of just take us back a step. This time round, though, the banks are more equipped to deal with debt and crisis situations, and they will be a lot quicker to sell stuff off now to the vulture funds. They were not here in 2007 and 2008, 2009, and they have since been given bigger teeth. So from that point of view, they'll be a lot more aggressive. Forbearance will be a lot more aggressive, be a lot quicker.
If you perhaps, right, but if you think that that forbearance somehow is going to extend beyond when the very last injection goes into the last shoulders, all hell will break loose, right? As the banks return to form and the government say, well, that's the forbearance done, we've done our bit, or it's now back to the normal processes and let's get on with it. To answer Neil's question, though, globally, it's already clear the US economy this year should be on target to get back to where it was at the end of 2019. That's the engine room. The Chinese are already on that way. That's the second biggest economy. The Irish economy should just come shooting out. I mean, we had some growth last year. That's the extraordinary thing in GDP because of the way it works. We're flat in GNP, which is the national measure. So this year we should see some growth, but it's going to take quite a long time, especially for the entertainment and arts, for hotels and restaurants and so on, to recover anything near what they were at the end of 2019. I think it's going to take several years to see that happen. The service economy is doing quite well. The industry is doing quite well. Financial services is doing okay. It's really concentrated in tourism, restaurants, hotels, transport, distribution, hammered, but especially the arts and entertainment business, absolutely hammered out the wazoo. And now all those in those professions are beginning to see that they've no political power. There's nobody talking for them.
No voice.
They've no voice. They're voiceless because they haven't put together the muscle to represent themselves at the table and demand a seat at the table the next time around.
True.
That's the
yeah, but you know, though, you could talk about this, you saying the voice around the table and the muscle. I mean, we have to talk about Brian Hayes. He's constantly out, let's just say RTE, he's constantly putting words into politicians' mouths on behalf of a lobby group that is primarily banks, it's money lenders, insurance companies. It's that whole group within the financial services sector. And, you know, I think we need to have a talk about that.
Well, I mean, he's
the guy out there batting for this type of special interest.
But you'll always
is
have lobby
anyone
groups
calling out on that?
Yeah, but the point.
Unions is a lobby group. I sit on their board. But the thing is, though, you have somebody that is out on mainstream media all the time, putting words into journalists' mouths, politicians' mouths, all the time. From a special interest group.
Yeah, I agree, but that's an observation, right? I mean, it's an accurate observation, totally accurate. But they have the money to do it. They have the power to do it. That's the issue. It's like you're in a game of football and you're up against a very, very strong team, far better players than you, highly paid. You have a bunch of amateurs. There's no good complaining to the referee. You've got to take the ball off them, right? And then make sure they don't get the ball back, right? And break a few legs if you have to.
That's the plan, Eddie. That's the plan, boy.
Right? So that's the point. Right? People have to wake up and get themselves organised in the private sector, and understand they don't have political representation. And if they think that the left-wing parties are suddenly going to wake up with a Pauline conversion about the package of stuff that's needed to get the SME growing, right? They're living in cuckoo land, right? And equally, Fine Gael is the party of big business. They're only interested in chumming around with the FDI crowd, right? And sitting down and negotiating
Davos,
right? So you can forget them as well, because they're certainly not going to do it, you know. And I know that I was writing there for a short while for the Sunday Independent, and I logged on and I listened to 2 podcasts that Pascal Donoghue had done, right, to 2 major accountancy firms, and I knew straight away there was about 2.5 hours of podcasting, right, that I listened to, and it was all he was talking to his audience, which was the owners of big business and FDIs, right, and I knew at the time that the Minister for Finance had yet to meet anybody from the SME sector. There was no meeting organised, and I just wrote about that and juxtapositioned it, right? And that was quite upsetting, because that was shining a light directly on the issue that up until that point, which I think was around May last year, the SMEs weren't even being in a dialogue. They couldn't even get a meeting with the government at that level. And that's
it's the biggest employer. It's the biggest employer in the state, the SME sector, folks.
But it's not just that. I turned off it like an awful lot of other people as well, you know, listening to the GTNs and all of that stuff coming out from the national broadcaster. And then I'd walk into my local Super Value store here in around Newbridge and Kilcullen and so on. And there was these young people, you know, in their early 20s, standing behind the counter and serving with their masks, terrified about what was going on, and yet turning up for work every day.
Yes.
Day in, day out, right? The ordinary people that turn up and do, you know, low
extraordinary things.
Yeah. They like, that's what kept us going.
Could I ask Eddie, and this might be a hairball question, but sure, we were talking about the Great Reset, so anything goes. Yeah. Is there a point where is there a point with the reopening where there's an industry? I'm not talking about arts and entertainment, where there is an industry damage to the point where it's causing, how would you say it, increased damage to the Irish economy overall. Let me just use a hypothetical example. So if you take the airline industry, so Eamon Ryan made comments today on News Talk to suggest that there is no plan for recovery there. So if you take an airline like Aer Lingus, which I think Leo said that we won't allow them to fail, we won't allow, even though they're British owned. I mean, AIG can quite simply take those planes as they're doing and put them on other routes. And as other European countries are opening up, no doubt Ryanair will do the same. They'll take the planes stationed in Dublin and move them elsewhere. Is there a point, and just using maybe them as an example, but I'm sure there's other industries that are the same, where as Europe accelerates the reopening, as vaccines are rolled out, but what have you, that there is a damage in an industry that does have a bigger consequence to the Irish economy that may be harder or for us to recover. I don't know if that question makes sense. It makes sense.
I know what you're getting to. Like, it's a really, really hard one, right? Because I mean, we've seen KLM, Air France nationalized, Air Italia nationalized, Lufthansa nationalized. And really, that's not good for airline industry. We know this because when we look at stock markets, government-owned companies generally fall down fairly quickly in terms of their efficiency and how markets price them and so on, because they're not as well run. They're just not as run efficiently as other organizations. That doesn't make them less important to society. I get that. I mean, you have to have some subsidies in absolutely critical areas, infrastructure, but you have to be very careful of assuming that a state solution can be found. Like, for example, the idea that local corporations can just step in and start building, you know, thousands of houses. They have no memory of how to build thousands of houses. I mean, and it was done in the 50s. Yeah, but that workforce is dead now. You know, like, they're just not there, right? So the idea that they can be, and it can be done cheaper, like, that's a myth. It's just talk, right? This is going to be slow slog and grind, unfortunately. But to answer your question about is there going to be permanent damage? Yes, there will be. And in my view, a cynical a cynical decision was made at the Department of Finance that the SME sector in Ireland could be thrown onto the pyre, that they would just go out of business and they would be replaced by other people who would simply step into the vacuum created by their failure. But because there would be no large catastrophic failures, which would lead to very large job losses, for example, the closure of a huge plant in a local area, right? We can take that pain because it's not really politically, it's not a political catastrophe. And that's the decision that was made. So
yeah,
but
sorry, Eddie, we compared that here. Sorry, Eddie, we compared that here. You will have a politician turning up and going, you know, killing themselves to be able to announce the arrival of 80 jobs in Kilmuckeridge, but they'll never turn up for the baker or the coffee shop that's opening and displaying artist work and employing 3 people or 4 people, like the traditional grassroots indigenous sort of industry. They'll drive themselves crazy to be the one to cut the ribbon at a new plant or a new development or something. So it's kind of, it's all about jobs, the announcement of jobs. It's all about the big ticket, the big house, being seen with the guy, or being seen with so-and-so. You know what I mean?
If you wanted to see it in action, all you had to do was watch the camera over the shoulder of Shane Ross when Katie Taylor came into the airport. That captured it.
That's it. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I heard he did well last night on Davies, though. I thought the Davies were right up his street. It's surprised he wasn't a board member at some point.
Yeah. So, anyway, look, that's
kind of populism, though.
Well, look, I'm just simply saying that that's what politicians do. Because that's their nature, and that's the nature of our system. But to come back to Neil's question, which is very, very important, is, well, what does the recovery look like for us? Well, the economy as a general thing will come flying out of this, and all of that positivity will happen. We'll be back on track. Our GDP will be growing, blah blah blah. But will we have addressed any of the underlying fundamental problems facing our society, like the housing deficit and the infrastructure deficit? No. Will our systems have changed? No. Will people who have become insolvent as a consequence of COVID-19 be given a break by the banks? No, they'll simply go through the same rotten sausage machine again. Right? Not until we decide that we've had enough, and then it will change. But unfortunately, I think I'll be a lot older by the time that happens. I do have I've great time for and I've great hope in the current generation of young people. I think they're highly educated. They've plenty of energy. They're just not switched on yet, and they will once they get a little bit older, and the responsibilities of maturity come with them. They will become political. Unfortunately, in the meantime, those that are political can be a bit radicalized, thinking that that there's binary solutions to these things. They're not. Running a state is a very complex business with a lot of moving parts, and it has to be done with great skill and elegance to get it right, left or right.
Yeah, well, I believe the cooperative way is the answer to everything, to be honest. I still do. I look at my colleagues all around the world and how they sort of changed. They put banking. Like, you go to Kenya, banking is gone in Kenya. It's all cooperative. It's all credit unions. Brazil, all gone. It's all cooperatives. Large parts of America, they're all credit unions. Credit unions. Yeah, the retail banking is gone.
I wanted to.
And I believe that to be our answer here in Europe. Well, if we're not being regulatory apartheid.
Well, I can make a bigger point, and that's that obviously as power is accumulating into the centre, into Brussels, and they move to more and more federalisation in Europe, which is where it's going, then you have to counterbalance it. And the way you counterbalance it is not by increasing or trying to push power into the national parliament. You need to pull it out of the national parliament and bring it down to local community level and empower local communities and local government with tax raising capacity to go and deal with issues on a local level. In other words, you counterbalance the power in Brussels by increasing the power locally. The problem is that what we're seeing an evisceration of national parliaments as the European experiment goes on. without the counterbalancing power going on at the local level. And I think that's part of the solution. On the credit union side, unfortunately, Vanessa, credit unions are in quite a trap because their assets are loans. So they have to issue more loans in order to be financially stable. Quite a lot of credit unions, their loan book is only about 25% of their assets. So 75% or even more is literally just investments. The investments are restricted by the central bank, so they have to stick them into the banks. The banks
well, I mean, this is part of the regulatory apartheid, Eddie. You know, I mean, our reserves, we're pinned into a regulatory reserve that's deliberately designed to put money into the retail banks.
Yeah, I know.
Whether people have realised that or not, it's time you woke up to it. And look, I don't want this to be about me and the cooperative movement at all. That's a bit of self-interest. But you keep mentioning about you know, the national parliament and stuff, and about taking back sort of getting a grip on our own decision making. I'm just going to say that, getting a grip on our own decision making. And I actually think we can do that. We just need to attract better people to go into professional politics, because I'm very disappointed in the Standard, particularly at the last general election, which was pretty much just this time last year. I despaired the state of candidates. I despaired. Like, I look at the current government now. I know that's who they had to pick from, but from who was elected. And the same, I know they can only pick from who's available to them, right? But Jesus, like, surely be to God, is there anyone out there considering public representation?
Well, here's we're back to the thing. In our clientelistic system, where we have an electoral cycle every 4 or 5 years, depending on how long the government can last, right? People that actually are talking, you know, good policy games. Like, policy takes 10, 15, 20 years to implement, right? That's not really a vote winner, right? And then the locals, then the people, like, people talk about reform. I talk about reform a lot. A lot of people walk into the polling booth and they'll come out and they'll talk about reform, and they'll talk about reform on the way into the polling booth. But in the polling booth, they'll tick the box next to the person that they think is nice, or knew their family, or turned up at the funeral, and they'll say, you know, we should have plenty of reform provided it's in the constituency next door. But I'm voting for your woman or your man because that's what we always did, and they're nice and they're warm, and they say the right things. They're not like that other fella or woman. They're shouting in the corner about policy and all that kind of stuff. Sure, I can't understand it at all. You know, that's what happens, and you can see the voting patterns quite clearly because of that. You know. And it's very, very, I can't tell you, because I was part of a group that tried it. It's almost impossible to start a political party in Ireland because the system is set up to stop it from happening. There's
plenty of political parties in Ireland, by the way. I think people forget how many registered political parties there are. It's just that they're not attracting quality candidates. If you look at it, the amount of registered parties is crazy.
Sorry, honey. Sorry. That is untrue. I got to stop you there. They are not attracting state support. All of the political parties exist. They get state support because we have outlawed, quite correctly, the American system of corporate donations and all that kind of thing. It's very, very
so
small.
That's why there's parties. It has nothing to do with representation.
That's why you have Stephen Donnelly being involved now. I mean, clearly, you know what I mean.
You can't. It's almost impossible to gain momentum to start a small political party. It would take decades to do it because of the way the system is set up. It's rigged effectively to keep the existing parties in the privilege.
Oh no, I get that, but are you suggesting people have created parties? I'll just go to the more recent ones. Okay, Renua, Aontú, the National Party. What's the crowd Herman does? What's his crowd called?
But you can start anything. That's not the point. It's about football, right? You have to go into the stadium and play the big boys at a game that you don't have the money to do it. You're organizing a meeting. You don't have the money. Who's going to buy the teas and coffees? That kind of stuff. That doesn't happen. The mainstream political parties have a stream of income that runs the machine. That's what you're up against.
And we've seen it since Desi O'Malley, the Progressive Democrats.
I can see. Sorry, guys, but I can see there is an establishment that was decades in the making, more than decades in the making. But you know, change starts with something starting.
It needs money. It needs money and funding.
But everything needs fucking money. You know, everything.
I've been in there. I've been in the engine room. I've seen it. Right, it was on fumes. fumes, which creates chaos, bad decision making, and all the other things then that happen, right? On fumes. And what happens then, unfortunately, is that it's the zealots stay around. And the sensible people say, Jesus, this isn't, we're out of cash here, I'm gone, right? And you end up with the zealots, and the zealots then are the people that remain. And then you get all of the other things that happen as a consequence of that. So I'm just simply saying that the political system in Ireland itself needs to be reformed to allow new political parties the oxygen to get going by funding them properly and giving them a chance. And that's not there. It's designed to strangle them.
Okay, well, I suppose that's a well-made point, but I still have great belief that the Irish people, the everyday person, the citizenry.
But Vanessa,
will
you're ignoring something really obvious. If I'm an ordinary man, a representative Irish citizen, or Neil is, we are in such a fucking purgatory existentially because of the last 12 years and the COVID, that everything we're talking about is purely aspirational. Not just because I'm 61 years old now, not just because of that. It's because they have knocked the stuff out of it. So it's just barely enough to stay alive. And so everybody that I would have been a kindred spirit with direct democracy and the presidential run and all that stuff is the same. We can't even consider aspirational politics. We have to deal. Vanessa, listen to yourself. We have to deal with what's in front of us.
No, I know that, but I'm not giving up yet, folks.
No, I'm not giving up. I'm just saying it's aspirational.
I'm conscious of the time, and we'd like to keep Eddie on all night. Eddie, we kind of lighten the mood as we reach the end of the show. I do want to pose a hypothetical to you.
Let's talk about
I want to pose a hypothetical though for you. Let's say Big Mick Collins came back from the grave and he said he had a word with D. Forbes, and D. Forbes said, right, Eddie can come back and he's untouchable by the political system, but you're only allowed to take down one cartel or challenge one thing in the economy, one structure. Who would you go after if you were allowed one big hit? Who would you go after?
The Irish deep state.
Whoa.
Do we have one? Oh, geez, that'd be brilliant. Hey, it's Hobbs and on.
QAnon here, Irish QAnon. Yes, fantastic.
Every country has a deep state. We do
absolutely
too.
Yes.
What's there? Is the Catholic Church? Is it?
It's a nexus of relationships that exist, the outer rim of which is protected by the academics and universities who stuff the panels in RTE.
Absolutely.
It has traces back into that room when the cartel was formed in 2001. Big business interests are all part of it. It's a nexus of relationships. And that is the state. That is the permanent state. The stuff that goes on then on the outside, the fellas and girls that go up and down the road, in and out of the Dáil. The deep state, really, as I call it, and it's not like they meet in rooms. It's just the way it works. It doesn't really matter to them which political parties form coalitions, because none of their manifestos are going to get in, because there'll never be a single party government in Ireland again. So it'll be some mishmash or another, and it'll be under EU rules anyway. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't matter, so long as they fulfill their primary function, which is the growth and survival of the organism itself.
Yeah,
and that's what they do, and they're the insiders. They're the insiders.
We've had our own awakening here this evening. The storm. We have Owen on. Oh, or Nian on. It depends whether you're a man or a woman.
No, I'm just saying that we'd have that as well. We do,
and maybe you've actually sort of put black and white to us there by calling it the deep state. We just always call it sort of the jobs for the boys. It actually is. We laughed it off. We were typically Irish by.
No, it's evidently been there. I mean,
we know, but we
joke about the Illuminati and all that. But yes, it is. Yeah. He's right. Absolutely right.
He's right. Yeah,
it's very clear, and that's why not being defeatist, but the idea of starting some unicorn party is aspirational. It's
well, I have no intentions of starting a political party. Jesus Christ.
No, but
I mean, like Lucinda.
Well, no, but the unicorn, the happy ever after party is not going to happen.
No, I get that. I get that, but but what Eddie just said there also about the mainstream parties, it goes back. I don't think Sinn Féin would conduct themselves that much different in government than
probably not.
Fianna Fáil,
Probably not.
Fine Gael. I'll be honest with you. They'd appoint the same judges. They'd appoint the same gigs would still go ahead. So I'm not.
And
I'm
as
not
Eddie
convinced.
just said there, I mean, if Sinn Féin would be as kowtowing to this deep state as anybody else would be, you know.
Well, what would be very interesting, Jimmy, is that if, as part of the reform, if as becoming a member of Dáil Éireann, you were required to swear an oath of allegiance to the state, right? To the Constitution and its people, and the Constitution.
Well, this is interesting.
That would make for a very interesting experiment because a substantial number of people who turn up at the Dáil have no allegiance at all to the Republic of Ireland and its democracy.
No, true. And I would say, again, I'm full disclosure, I'm a member of Sinn Féin. Well, I'm unpaid this year.
Well, you are.
But I think that would be the least worst option. But yes, of course, power corrupts. But the idea of incorporating, sections 47, 48, the Constitution, an allegiance, an oath of allegiance, probity, ethics, these things that we discuss all the time. Sinn Féin are ripe for that, actually.
Okay, well then, that's good. It's good to hear that.
I don't know how one would go about implementing that.
Well, it would need a consensus.
Well, starting there, yes.
That is something that could be done because there would be cross-party support for it. But back to Vanessa's point, though, like if you're really going to start a new political movement in this country, genuinely, give you the number, you need at least €1 million. If you want to generate a national party from scratch, right, and put up the candidates and have the policies and do all of that, you need about €1 million to do it.
I'll be giving her ideas, Eddie. We're in enough trouble with her on the show every week.
According to Ronan Mullen there, Soros is paying for everything in this country. So, just to answer that questioner, that person in the chat pit, Neil, do you mind just before we just go back into it? Caesar Girl asked about the Senator Ronan Mullen speech, and I'm assuming she's talking about his link to Soros. Let me tell you about the likes of Ronan Mullins, and you know what? If you find yourself worried about anything he has to say, all you have to do is go to the opposite side of everything he does or says, and you know you're in a safe place now. And he mentions transparency in his speech, and my answer to that is you first, Senator. Then you get to question everybody else's transparency and accountability. Okay. So that's that question dealt with. Right. You could do the rest there. That's
anyway.
I won't be meeting you any place in the dark alley anymore. I'm frightened.
Ronan Mullen. Hey, join his fucking party. They'll have no shortage scrounging up $1 million.
Yeah.
If Vanessa finds you, you don't find her. That's how it works.
Hey.
Stop it. €1 million. You know what? Like, you're talking about setting up a political party. I actually think, I wouldn't be an advocate of joining a political party. Like, I like the idea that I'm independent and I can say and do what I like. And that's probably been the hardest part of being a sole trader, because I've turned down partnerships in the Big Four. There's just the freedom of being able to say and do what you like. Okay, I'm broke. I won't have the benchmark pension for life. Well, unless, if somebody wants to nominate me into the Senate or something like that.
Well, no, actually,
I'm open.
I need to correct you.
Jesus, what have I done now?
No. I've said this many times that the best thing that you can do if you're in the private sector is to stay single for as long as you can, and then roughly in your late 50s, marry somebody at a high level of pay in the public sector. And that's the highest internal rate of return on a pension.
Now you tell me.
Preferably
everyone's updating their Tinder profiles as we speak.
Preferably somebody who's not going to last too long, who's got underlying health trouble, right?
Well,
okay.
That's the plan, Vanessa. Hey. Write it down. You heard it here. That's the plan.
Well, yeah, that's fair enough. But we all have 20. We each have. But Neil's going to remind us now. He's not at middle age yet, right? And we're all well past it.
And I just feel that if there's any creaking singletons out there in the public sector on very high rates of pay, about to pop their clogs and need a little bit of company, we've got somebody you need to talk to.
Well, we could. All we need is a back-to-back as a ministerial, even as a junior.
Unfortunate choice of words there, unfortunate metaphor there.
Eamon Ryan is set now. He's set. He's got his back-to-back. Simon Harris is set.
34 years
his
old. 33 years
back-to-back.
old. Shocking.
Yeah, and he can collect at 50.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you should
I
become
don't
a
want to get
politician and
personal
then
about it, but
No, you should,
like
you should become a politician
you
40
know,
years ago.
we talk about apartheid regularly here, and between the regulatory apartheid and now in the last year, the very obvious apartheid and how we run the country, you know, the cheaters cheat us all versus what, you know, the whole thing, and you know. The next civil divide. Now, obviously, during COVID, there's been the them and us, who was seen as essential and who got full pay, and those who were put onto the €350 a week, or like as Neil and Jimmy would tell you, they got nothing pretty much because they didn't have a rateable premises. A guy supplying a PA equipment up and down the country in a van, working every hour he could. That was it. Nothing. No, he didn't get looked after at all. Rather than just make it about the entertainment industry, just let me bring it back to this: is that the next big one, besides who owns a house and who doesn't, is the pension, and that's the next social divide. Who's got pensions and who doesn't? Because I know people, and you know, I'm related to someone who actually, well, since died, but her pension was more than she actually ever earned.
Yeah.
And her pension was more than somebody her grade starting in the job was.
Well,
and I was accused of being a Brendan Burgess, somebody very close to Broadsheet, by the way. Accused me of being very Brendan Burgess like, and you know, the guy, your bank shares are safe, that guy, by criticizing the benchmark pensions. I was sounded, it's not the thing. So that is the runaway train. That is your National Children's Hospital, is the public pension fund. And anyone who hasn't copped that's going to be a big divide in the next 10 to 15 years, you're out of your minds.
I agree with you. I mean, it's something I've been writing a lot about over the years. I mean, we have an apartheid retirement, and retirement poverty is the biggest thing we'll be facing in the very, very near future. I can tell you that the total pension debt mountain, liability mountain on the public payroll at the time of benchmarking was 25 billion. 25 billion. Up until the last actuarial review, it had risen to 116 billion, right? Divide 25 into 116, goes in more than 4 times, right? So it went up fourfold over a period of, 20 years. The last actuarial review, it jumped up to 150 billion, and it caused a little flutter in the media. So the number went from 116 billion to 150 billion. And it came out with a little, the talk went around, well, this is because of changes in actuarial assumptions. The assumptions change. What actually happens, the cost of actually buying a bloody pension in the real economy went through the roof. And when they applied it to look at the value of the liabilities that were built up, it had jumped to 150 billion. Like the national debt, that's a huge chunk of the national debt, right? And I mean,
it has to be serviced, by the way, folks. That's paid through payroll.
And I keep saying it. And then in the PRSI fund, which pays the old age pension, the total liability mountain is 324 billion. Right. So add the two of them together, and you're up to a half a trillion in off-balance sheet liabilities that are unfunded. And the only way they can be funded is by either cutting the benefits down to what we can afford, by capping public sector pensions at maybe once or twice the average wage and not above that. It would have to be actuarially calculated to do that to something we can actually afford, and stop giving people huge uplifts in pension for big uplifts in salary just coming up to retirement. It's an old dodge. So you end up with about a half a dozen people all retired on massive pensions because they all occupied the same position for a couple of years before they retired. Yeah. Keeping their seats warm for one another. It's revolting. It's crazy stuff.
Well, here's the answer to this. Here's the answer to this. And fight out take this on with the unions, right? No state pension, none. I don't care if you're a recently parachuted Fine Gael appointed Supreme Court judge. Okay, I don't care how tight your friends are. No state pension. should be greater than the average industrial wage. None. I don't care whether you're a Tuachtar na HÉireann or a Supreme Court judge or a retiring cardiac surgeon or a school teacher. No state pension provided should be greater than the average industrial wage. And anyone who thinks it should be a multiple of that should be in a republic. In a republic. I'd like to look, I'm breaking out with rash again.
Yeah, but you see, the way you would do that, you'd have to introduce a universal pension scheme with common rules for both private and public workers to allow mobility between both sectors. That would require quite significant reform and an increase as well, by the way, in social insurance contributions to fund all that. I mean, deal with the problem. But people
would pay that, Eddie, if they thought they were getting it. Like maternity benefit is the big story this week, right? I paid more in PRSI. I did in PRSI the year before I took maternity leave than I actually collected in maternity benefit. I actually paid more in just 1 year in PRSI. Not in just PAYE and PRSI and employers PRSI, just on PRSI alone more than I collected out of the pot for myself.
The myth that we're spinning constantly keeps being spun by senior political spokesperson.
Yeah, cheat us all.
And by the way, and it's believed as well by some of the major media presenters in Ireland, is that these numbers that you have for the off-balance sheet liabilities, they're all really a myth. That's true. The population will look after it. That's why we will have population growth and that'll solve it. I mean, that's the spin that's coming out from the people that actually have the privileges. Yeah. Now, don't be worried about the cost. Sure, just because it's gone from 116 billion to 150 billion, sure, they're only numbers on a piece of paper.
Somebody else's job to worry about. That's their attitude.
They're not
like
really.
Pascal looks at this, Eddie, right?
I've had quite a lot of heated argument about this off air with presenters, right? And said, like, you're talking through your backside. You're listening to people that are talking through their backside. They don't know what they're talking about. In fact, some of them do. It's just propaganda. Like that, these aren't real numbers. They are real numbers. Debt is real, and it has to be paid.
I'm conscious of time, and it's bedtime for us all. But I did say we'd finish on a light note, so I'm going to ask Eddie, completely change the topic, because we often talk about what we're watching on the telly because there's feck all else to do in lockdowns. What's on in the Hobbs household? What's keeping you up on Netflix or watching the TV late at night?
Well, it's way past my bedtime. Like, I'm normally in the scratcher for like 9:30. Seriously, 9.
Really?
I'm up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Like, so I mean, I don't know how I'm still awake.
How would you earn your arse? We just started the show.
I am up very early. If you watch my Twitter feed, it begins pretty early, you know. So that's just my circadian cycle. I suppose we, like every other family, where we're operating within the 5 kilometre rule. We were lucky we're living in a rural area, so we can get out and walk nice lanes around the Kilcullen, Giltown area, which is very, very, which is a great privilege to be able to do that. But like, I'm suffer from everybody else with the sense of underlying anxiety. Some days up, some days down. It doesn't feel right. There's something missing. I don't know exactly what it is. And you have to force yourself to snap out of it and get going again. And that's why I don't listen to RTE anymore. I just gave it up for just, I couldn't bear it. It was like, as I said, it was like the Hammer horror scene in the old movies, you know, watching the vampires appear on RTE to tell us how bad it is. And basic maths was obvious. I mean, this gross infection rate nonsense is rubbish. Like, because sure 2 weeks later, sure, you're sore.
Eddie,
you know,
he wants to know what you're watching on the telly.
I know that I was going off on one.
Yeah,
what are you watching?
I was enjoying that little tandem.
I know you were. You were rolling around with it. The misery.
What I end up doing is I end up watching stuff on television, and I'm online as well, reading about the historical implications of it. But I thought a very, very good series lately for anybody interested in finance and any kind of it is Devils, and in the box set on Sky. It's about a hedge fund during the global financial crisis. It's brilliantly written. The fantastic set of actors.
Devils.
Episode 4 is about shorting the Irish bond market. And the entire section is about that, and it has clips. Vincent Browne appears in it quite a lot, and it ends with him having a go at the ECB heads when they come in, And I thought it was very, very well written, very, very well done. If you haven't seen it, it's riveting if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Well, he ran Jimmy up now. He's going to put that on now when he.
No, I'll check that out because I recently watched the Big Short again. Fantastic. So I'll definitely watch Devils. Yes.
Very good.
Thank you for the recommendation.
On that note, Eddie, I want to really thank you for giving up your time and joining us tonight. It's been very insightful, I have to say, and certainly some of the topics we talked about, I wasn't expecting. So that was a nice surprise. So
can I just say one last thing, right? Because you go after what else you do. When I go out for walks, I'm always playing history, right? So BBC Radio 4 have a thing called In Our Time, and there's hundreds of history programs. They're about 45 minutes long. They're brilliantly presented by Melvin Bragg, and he brings in fantastic guests from all over the place. So if you're interested in history, that's one to listen to.
Can I give you an aphorism on that? Just history. It's the history repeats itself. I don't learn from history. I do repeat it. History doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies and
That's
gentlemen.
the artist. You see, this is why he's a Grammy nominee.
And listen, Jimmy, you'll be interested to know that during my first lockdown, I wrote my first novel.
Is that right?
In draft form, and I'm looking for a literary agent anywhere, wherever I can find one, to try and get into some publishing house. Otherwise, I'd have to self-publish the goddamn thing.
And is it a novel or is it a?
It's a historical fiction.
Historical. Would you be interested in forward me a PDF draft on it, or is it something?
This is my book.
Yeah, absolutely. The lead character is a female scholar. It's based in the 13th century France and Ireland. So think of the Da Vinci Code. It's a hunt for missing information that takes place during that period. So she's the lead character in it.
Fantastic.
Oh wow, guys! Who wouldn't want to publish a book about the 13th century?
And it crosses time frames. It starts in Alexandria, in the.
Well, my book was written years ago, by the way, folks, as most of you know, is actually set in the year of the double.
Oh, listen, the year of the double.
That's far more recent history.
I had just moved up from Cork, and I was getting a lot of slagging from the Dublin fellas, and Dublin people about Cork and the accent. Just has never changed. I actually just made my accent even stronger. But Cork won the double, and this is a true story. I went up to the joke shop at the top there of Grafton Street.
Oh, next door to the Gaiety.
Yeah, and I got a few bottles, creamy, and I took the label off them, and I had typed on it. I sent around about a dozen of these to people. Some of them, I think, still have them, and there was a little label on it, and it said, "Attached here with Cork sperm. Start planning."
Oh, Jesus, see, that's muck now. You see, that's
dirt. You see now, well.
Well, I moved to Dublin in 1990 as well.
The tone lowered. That's all right.
I know. I moved to Dublin in 1990 as well. Myself and Tony Donoghue, we were on the train actually, because he'd got the job in RT just to do League of Ireland, and we moved to Dublin together. And I remember thinking then, feck it, it was lucky. And there was laggers all over the place for two. Do you know, they didn't bother going back because we're hanging around Rathmines for the whole 3 weeks. Yeah. And I figured it was lucky, so I never went back. That's my story anyway, folks.
I thought the best comment about Cork was Tommy Tiernan when he was down there. And he was talking about the fact that like a lot of people didn't realize that Armstrong wasn't the first guy that landed on the moon. It was a bunch of Cork astronauts that took off from Cork Airport in the 50s. And they landed on the moon, and they actually have a recording of the first Cork person on the moon. It was brilliant.
Tommy's thinking
you could do it like only.
Well, that's the theory about Dubai. You were the first man to land here. Well, you named this kingdom. He goes, Dubai.
But the first word spoken at the time by the Cork astronaut was the breathing first. He does the breathing, the heavy breathing. Well, it's not Cork anyway.
On that note,
speaking of Cork, do you recognise the picture behind me, Eddie?
I didn't want to say it earlier on, but it looks rude.
It looks a bit rude. Or a Black Forest gatto.
No, it's cake.
Don't bother your bottle. Is that the joke?
No, it's cake. Eddie,
it's cake.
Surprised at you.
Oh, it's the Thompsons.
The clock, Battenberg.
Battenberg. There you go.
Battenberg, that's it.
I've rebuilt the recipe. And
I,
was
I
in
nearly knew
publishing
that actually, and I'm not nowhere near.
Pop Battenberg.
Yeah, Battenberg.
Anyway, sorry,
On that-
folks. I've
on-
drifted a bit.
no.
What I watched actually, no, Neil. Do you know Britney Spears? She's in a conservatorship at the moment. There's actually a documentary on Netflix, I think, and I watched that the other night, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, and it's actually quite scary in a way that someone who's such a profound artist and big art. Maybe her style isn't everybody's, but she's so talented, so prolific, and such a machine, and she could be controlled by this conservatorship. And it's actually a bit scary, and I would recommend people to watch that if they get a chance, and they can just see the control.
Yeah,
that type of trusteeship can have on people. I never trusted the American system about that I had this here, because ours is kind of done but through the court office. You're a ward of court, and it's all done through the court office.
Oddly,
Scary.
That's funny, because
scary,
I just
folks.
watched that movie the other night with that. What's her name? That lovely English actress. She's a bit like Kate Winslet or someone. She's another blonde. Name a couple of names. Jesus, current English actress. Anyway, she plays an American person who runs this scam on retirement.
Oh,
home.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah. Oh God,
Her name is gone. It's actually very good. It's actually really chilling. Really, really chilling. Like that people. And then she kind of almost at the end, I was trying, who are we batting for here? Her or the little guy out of Game of Thrones, that dwarf Ladin. What's it? The little Macaulay Culkin guy. What's his name?
Rosamund Pike.
Rosamund Pike. Very good. So you didn't know who to, like, there was which protagonist, who were we cheering for at the end? And then in the end, she gets hers. Luckily, but it looked like she wasn't going to. But it was very chilling, and it was about that. It was about the scam to get people committed to hospice and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I haven't watched it. I will watch it, but that whole thing about the way they do the conservatorship, it's a bit like in the UK, by the way, for bankruptcy, a trustee, but a trustee could be a local accountant or something. Well, I'm not saying that's what happens. They apply to get licensed and stuff. Whereas here, it's all done through the court service, and it's actually quite scary how that system works. So I would recommend people to look into that Britney Spears thing, because it's actually quite sad that someone's entire livelihood could be controlled in such a way. And
was her loneliness killing her? Do you think?
No, well,
that's a little lyrical joke.
Oh yeah,
you're clearly not a Britney Spears fan.
Right,
So.
That's it. We're going to bed. Right?
I think so. The jokes are getting slim. They're getting so thin. They're getting patent thin, wafer thin. The jokes are getting.
Yeah, I know. I think the point here is a businesswoman has been completely manipulated. She was booked into this massive Vegas show and never saw a penny of it.
Well, old story.
Well, we tried to end on a positive. Eddie's book could have been the positive, but we hijacked that with more bad news. So I'll give you the best positive news that we can finish the show on. There was no talk about any royal interviews on Oprah in this show tonight. So we achieved something.
That's a win. That's a win.
On that, again, big thanks to Eddie for joining us tonight. Eddie, great stuff, very insightful. And to those of you in Dublin, we apologise for having two Cork voices on the air. It's bad enough having to listen to one Vanessa. Over the north side, the Countess of Crumlin. Vanessa forward. Thanks very much, Vanessa. And our man on the north side.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Two-time Grammy Award nominated Jimmy Smith. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to listen to you, Eddie. Great pleasure listening to you. Fantastic listening to such erudition. Fantastic. And of course, Vanessa, as always, a pleasure. Never a chore. And then Neil, of course. So.
We will be back again next week. We've another guest lined up next week. We're going to Tipperary for our guest next week, I believe. I believe it's Tipperary. But is it Tipperary?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Watch the space. I'm very excited. Back on the site tomorrow. If you want to get in touch, ask questions, you know where to find us. If you want to come on the show,